Hey, sickos. I'm LJ,
And I'm Tao.
and this is.
Say psycho right now.
So glad to have you all here.
Oh, we sure are. And boy, do we have a doozy for you today.
Yes, I know that Toe has been poring over resources for a couple of weeks now to get this case ready for you guys. And, usually when we do cases, one of us will do the primary, research and reporting, and the other one, kind of isn't, entirely in the loop on the situation unless they happen to have like known about the case before. And
Yeah.
personally, I know about the Murdaugh murders just in general,
I'm
very
sure we all
loosely.
I'm sure we all do to some extent. This has been in the news recently.
Exactly. So I've caught headlines, but I haven't done deep dive research or even really watched documentaries on it because I was like, oh, Toe's doing this one. I just want to hear what she has to say. So thank you for being that for me. So sorry that you have been because I know it's been a lot.
So thrilled to be that for you. So, without further ado, like LJ said, we are going to get into the Murdoch case today, and basically just a brief overview. We're going to go, we've all heard the headlines about the Murdoch murders, about Alec Murdoch killing his wife and son, Maggie and Paul, but we're going to start back a little further because I think it's important that we look into the history of this family and the events that led up to these murders, because it's a lot more than just murder here. So without further ado, I'm just going to jump right into it because this is a really meaty case. So the Murdoch family is a prominent and connected family from the low country of Hampton County, South Carolina. It's This area is said to be the kind of place where everybody knows everybody, and everybody absolutely knows the Murdoch family. Since the 1920s, members of the Murdoch family have been heavily involved with the local judicial system, and for 86 consecutive years, the title of Solicitor of the 14th Judicial District was held by a member of the Murdoch family. And for context, that's basically like equivalent to it's a prosecutor.
Okay. So it's
So
like an elected role.
I believe so, yes.
Okay.
So for 86 consecutive years, I want to say up until 2006, that title has been held by some member of their family. The 14th Circuit District is comprised of 5 counties in the South Carolina Low Country, and as a result of the family's reign, became known by locals as Murdoch Country. Now, the main character in, you know, recent years has been Alec Murdaugh, right? Born Richard Alexander Murdaugh, he was born May 27th, 1968, to Randolph Murdaugh III and Elizabeth Alexander Murdaugh. He graduated from the University of South Carolina in 1990, majoring in political science. And in 1993, he married Margaret Branstetter, better known as Maggie, and he graduated from the University of South Carolina Law School in 1994. Soon after that, he did join the family law firm. So in addition to working in the solicitor's office, his family also had a law firm. And he also volunteered part-time in the solicitor's office. Where at this point, again, his family had reigned for over half a century.
Right.
So he and Maggie had two sons. Richard Alexander Murdaugh Jr., better known as Buster, was born in 1996, and Paul Terry Murdaugh was born in 1999. Soon after joining the family firm, Alec made a name for himself, representing members of the community in personal injury law cases. And specifically, his specialty was wrongful death lawsuits.
Ironic, but okay.
Well, exactly. And that's kind of why I mention it, because it kind of becomes relevant at several points during this case, as you can imagine.
Yeah.
So that's just a little background on the Murdaugh family. Now basically how I'm going to try and do this is I'm going to try and go down the timeline that led to their fall from grace, right? So I'm going to try to keep it congruent. It's hard not to jump around a little bit because this case is really messy, but I'm going to try and keep the timeline as congruent as I can. So we're going to start here on July 8th, 2015. 19-year-old Stephen Smith was a former classmate of Alec and Maggie's eldest son, Buster. He was found dead in the middle of a country road in South Carolina. His car was found 3 miles away from his body, and it was out of gas. The case was initially investigated by South Carolina Highway Patrol before going cold in 2016. An autopsy was performed, and it concluded that Smith died from blunt force trauma caused by a hit and run. However, his mother believes that he was murdered. And if you dig a little deeper, there's a lot of evidence to support this theory. Stephen's injuries included a large laceration to the side of his head, which was inconsistent with a vehicle strike. There were no skid marks or debris where his body was found. And the placement of his body in the middle of the road was said to have been inconsistent with a vehicle strike. Now, Stephen was openly gay, which is risky in the Deep South.
Right.
Some reports mention that Buster and Stephen were friends. There's conflicting reports on that, and some reports even mention that they may have been having a secret affair. And although the Murdaugh family name was mentioned over 40 times during the course of this investigation, no member of the family was ever brought in for questioning, and no arrest was ever made. Yeah. So, I mean, again, you have to realize how connected these people are. They can make problems go away very quickly and very easily. Not so much anymore, but at this time.
Right.
Now, interesting points here. It has been reported that Alec's brother, Randy Murdaugh, has been linked to at least 3 separate attempts to derail this investigation.
And do we have more information on those attempts, or is it just like...
No, we don't. Now, so what we know as of today, as of the time of this recording, is that this investigation into Stephen's death has been reopened following a discovery of new evidence during the investigation of the murders of Maggie and Paul. We don't know what that evidence is. They're keeping it very tight-lipped at this point.
Okay.
But we do know that they found something during that investigation that made them say, hey, we need to reopen this case.
Okay, that's valid.
Yeah. So we're going to fast forward to 2018, okay? February 26th, 2018. The family's longtime nanny and housekeeper, Gloria Satterfield, died after falling down a set of stairs at the family's hunting property. You may hear this property referred to as Moselle. This family owned multiple properties, but this property is a key location in this story.
Okay.
At the time, her death was ruled accidental, but authorities reopened the investigation last year, and they said that her body would be exhumed. Now, to my knowledge, I don't believe that's happened yet. but I believe the investigation is still ongoing. Now,
Okay.
at the time when this happened in 2018, Alec told investigators that he believed Gloria had tripped over the family's dogs and fell down the stairs.
Sounds
Although
just like far fetched to me, even without context.
yeah, that's what I'm saying. So, she did survive the initial fall, but she had major head injuries and 12 broken ribs, and
Uh-huh.
she died sometime later at the hospital.
And I guess she wasn't like conscious to give a statement from the sounds of it.
Yeah, no, I believe she was in a coma. She was on life support for a period of time, and
Okay.
then she did pass away. Now, at her funeral, Alec Murdaugh approached her sons and told them he wanted to take care of them.
Mm-hmm.
Now, keeping in mind here, Alec's legal specialty is wrongful death cases.
Right.
So, Alec, he instructed the young men to file a wrongful death suit actually against him so that his insurance would pay out. He promised them each a settlement of $100,000,
Mm-hmm.
and he set them up with an attorney. The attorney was named Corey Fleming, and he agreed to represent them in this matter, and he was a good friend of Alex. We're gonna get to what became of that case in a little bit, because again, the timeline. So fast forward to February 23rd, 2019. Paul borrowed his father's 17-foot boat to go out with some friends. And from my understanding, this was one of several boats, because later in an interview, Alec would be talking about how, Paul was a little irresponsible, and he would leave things he would leave things all over the place at friends'
Mm-hmm.
houses, and he said he would do that with all of my boats.
What?
Yeah, he said that Paul would leave his boats places. So I don't know how many boats they own, but presumably there was an abundance of boats to be had.
I mean, it sounds that way.
It sounds that way. So he borrowed a 17-foot boat to go out with some friends. Now there were three couples on the boat: Paul and his girlfriend Morgan at the time, Connor and his girlfriend Miley, and then finally Anthony and his girlfriend Mallory.
Mm-hmm.
Now, they had planned to go party together, and it is said that this would be a typical night out for this group. Paul was a big drinker, and his parents not only supported his habit, but they would even encourage it. And they often bought him alcohol despite his being underage. Now, before hitting the water that night, surveillance footage shows then 19-year-old Paul at a gas station using his brother's ID to purchase alcohol for the group. Now, the plan for the evening was to go meet up with some friends, hang out with them for a few hours, and then head back to the Murdaugh family river house, not to be confused with their hunting property. This is
Okay.
another property, okay? So, while at their friend's oyster roast, Paul had allegedly been drinking very heavily, and people at this party were extremely concerned, and they advised Paul not to drive the boat back. In addition to Paul being shit-wrecked, it was extremely foggy, and the boat didn't have functioning lights.
Right.
So Paul, of course, being the type of person that he was, he refused the sound advice given to him, as he was known to be cocky and even a mean drunk. And not only did Paul insist on driving the boat back to the river house, but he decided to consume even more alcohol prior to doing so.
Well, of course he did.
Of course he did, because he's a rich little white boy that's never suffered a consequence for anything a day in his life.
Yeah.
May he rest in peace, but honestly.
But
Surveillance footage from the local bar shows Paul and Connor being served shots despite being underage. And then by the time they get to the boat, it is said that Paul was incredibly intoxicated. So eventually, Paul decides to start driving the boat in circles.
mm-hmm.
His friends are begging and pleading with him to stop this damn boat. He's not listening. The girls especially are said like they're terrified.
Right.
His friends also reported that he would repeatedly leave the wheel unattended to walk back and yell at his girlfriend.
A real charmer.
Sounds like a real winner, right? Allegedly, Connor attempted to take control of the boat, but he was unfortunately unsuccessful. And at one point, Mallory spoke up and asked Paul to take them back, but he refused. So around 2:20 a.m., after about an hour in the water, Paul sped the boat through an area known as Archer's Creek. And it said that this is like a really narrow, winding waterway.
Right.
And it was here that they crash into the pillars of a bridge going over 30 miles per hour.
Oh, no.
Mallory, sweet Mallory, who begged him to turn this godforsaken boat around, she was sitting on her boyfriend's lap at the time of impact, and she was ejected.
Oh. And
Yeah.
I'm assuming she didn't make it.
No, she didn't. The group began to panic, and Connor called 911. Now, when authorities arrived to the scene, Mallory was still nowhere to be found, and 3 officers that night actually had connections to the Murdaugh family. Surprise, surprise.
Shocker.
Yeah. So while EMS searched for Mallory's body, I mean, at this point, they knew they were looking for a body, or they were pretty confident they were looking for a body, anyways.
Right.
The other 5 occupants of the boat were taken to the hospital, where Paul was finally administered a blood test.
Right.
And despite 4 hours having passed from the initial accident, 4 hours, you guys, Paul's blood alcohol content was still 3 times the legal limit.
Oh my God.
So now at this point, allegedly, Paul's grandfather showed up to the hospital and went room to room, encouraging the kids. I mean, they're legal adults, but I'm going to call them kids here. They're like 18, 19 years old.
Right.
Encouraging the kids not to talk to the police.
Right.
But Paul also denied having been the operator of the boat, stating, quote, "Why do you need to know who was driving? That's not going to help find Mallory," end quote. Well, because we need to know who to charge with her death, you fucking jackass.
Yeah. I mean, it just seems like he's so delusional with privilege.
Oh, objectively. So there was a lot of back and forth about who was actually driving the boat. As you'll recall, Connor attempted to gain control over the boat, but was unsuccessful. And as a result of that, which really sucks for this Connor kid, because his intentions were 100% pure.
Right.
But as a result of, that, his name was brought up several times as potentially who could have been driving the boat.
Right. Oh.
Connor would actually later hire a team of lawyers to file a civil petition claiming that the Murdaugh family was trying to frame him for this accident.
Yeah, I don't blame him.
The petition also claimed that several police officers were involved in trying to frame him for this accident.
I would presume that this claim had merit based on everything else we're hearing.
So it did, and there was a lot of civil cases filed as a result of this accident. I'm not sure exactly on the results of those cases, because everything kind of got derailed by the the subsequent events of the years to follow. And I'm sure it will all be, so from what I understand right now is that the whole family's assets are being liquidated, and there's a bunch of lawyers working on where all this money is to be going, because this family fucked a lot of people over.
Right.
So I'm hoping that, the victims of this accident hopefully will get a piece of the pie.
That would be nice, because I've seen, what some of these items are selling for. And like, for being a pretty wealthy, well-off family, some of the items that are being sold are pretty like shoddy, but selling for astronomical prices. And I was thinking, like, I hope the money is going to the victims, but are they going to the surviving family members? You know what I mean? So
yeah. So, well, as this case starts to unfold, we'll see there's a lot of pending litigation against them. And my assumption would be anybody that has, a legal claim to a settlement will probably get a piece of this estate, would be my assumption.
That would be good. Yeah.
Now, so we've gone over the petition that Connor filed. So now the Coast Guard and a team of volunteers searched the marshes for Mallory's body for 7 days.
man.
And on March 3rd, 2019, Mallory's body was found 5 miles from the crash site where she was initially thrown into the water.
And we think that's probably just from like natural drift and stuff like that.
I'm
Yeah.
sure. I'm sure. Now, it was no secret in this community that Paul was unlikely to face any legal consequences due to who his family was.
Sure.
But Mallory's parents did file a wrongful death suit against the bar and gas station that served alcohol to the underage teens and against Maggie and Alec Murdaugh, stating that they willfully contributed to their son's underage drinking. Now, against all odds, on April 18th, 2019, which would have been Mallory's 20th birthday. Oh my God, she has the same birthday as me.
Oh.
Yeah. So Paul was indicted on charges of boating under the influence causing death and 2 counts of boating under the influence causing great bodily injury.
Mm.
I mean, and I'm sure other people on the boat were injured as well. I don't have a comprehensive list of those injuries, but I do know that they were all taken to the hospital.
Right.
On May the 6th, 2019, Paul pled not guilty to all charges,
Mm-hmm.
and the judge ordered a mandatory mediation between Paul and the Beach family, which didn't take place until June 4th, 2021. It's almost, God, over 2 years later.
I was gonna say that's a fair amount of time.
Yeah. And it was unsuccessful. Now, because it was unsuccessful, a trial date was set, but that never actually happened. Because 3 days after the mediation, Paul was dead. So, at 10:07 p.m. on June the 7th, 2021, Alec called 911 to report that his wife and son were both shot and were unresponsive.
Mm-hmm.
This was all taking place again at the hunting property, Moselle. Now, an important note here is that Paul tells 911 operator that he had touched their bodies to see if they were breathing. Sergeant Daniel Green with the Colleton County Sheriff's Office was the first to arrive on the scene that night. And his body cam footage shows a seemingly distraught Alec explaining to Sergeant Green that despite the 911 operator explicitly telling him to remain unarmed until authorities arrived,
Right.
he had gone and got a gun, allegedly, to defend himself if this shooter came back or whatever.
Right.
Now, why that's relevant in this case is that any gunshot residue found on his hands could potentially be explained by transfer particles from this weapon.
Right.
And this is a hunting property, so there are guns and guns and guns and more guns.
Right.
The collection is, I wish I had an accurate count. I don't, but the collection is massive.
Right.
No, immediately Alex starts going into, he starts going on about the case with the boat crash and explaining that he believes that his family was targeted as a result of, everything that's been going on with this boat crash. Because
Right.
people were outraged. Mallory was a very well-liked and loved young woman.
Right.
And people were pissed. People were fed up with this family and their bullshit, and they were rightfully upset that a young woman's life was lost and this person was presumably not going to face any consequences.
Absolutely.
So he told Sergeant Green that Paul had been getting threats. And he goes on to explain, the whole situation. So Sergeant Green goes on and he asks Alec about when he got home. And at this point, Alec begins to provide a brief synopsis of his alibi for the evening, which he later went into much more detail on in his first official interview.
Okay.
So the interview here took place right there on the property in a vehicle owned by SLED. Now, SLED is a name that you're going to hear a lot throughout the course of this episode, and that stands for South Carolina Law Enforcement Division. And they are, from my understanding, they're like the big boys that handle these massive murder investigations and stuff in the area. Basically stuff that the local cops don't have the resources to
Sure.
deal with. So Alec, so they're in this vehicle. This begins the first official interview. Now, Alec claims that in the early afternoon, he spent 45 minutes to an hour riding around the property with Paul and waited for Maggie to arrive home from a doctor's appointment in Charleston. He claims it was pretty late until Maggie got home, and that the three of them ate dinner together, and that after that, Maggie and Paul walked down to the dog kennels.
Right.
Now, Alec goes on to say that he did not follow them down to the dog kennels, but rather he hung back at the house and watched some TV, eventually falling asleep on the couch.
Mm-hmm.
He claims that he slept for maybe 25 to 30 minutes before going to visit his mom. Now, his mom lived about 15 to 20 minutes away from the property. And the thing is, his mother has late stage dementia, and his father was hospitalized at the time. Alec proceeds to tell investigators prior to leaving, he did attempt to call Maggie and see if she wanted to come along, but she didn't answer. Phone records indicated that this call was placed around 9:04 p.m. Now, he also said that he texted her, but she didn't respond. And he did mention that she didn't usually go with him to visit his mom, so he didn't find it all that strange to not get a response. But he also goes on to say that she's usually really good about texting him back, so it was a little odd, but not overtly alarming. He goes on to say that he made several phone calls on his way to his mother's residence, and he was only there for a short while before heading back. Now, I just want to talk about this timeline here because it gets muddled a little bit later on. Now, the phone call to Maggie went out at 9:04, right? And this is confirmed by phone records. And he texted her again at 9:47. And he claims that when this text went out at 9:47, that's when he began to head back. So 9:04 is when he left. 9:47 is when he began to head back. Factor in the 15 to 20 minute drive, he probably got there around 9:25.
Right.
So that puts him there for maybe 20, 25 minutes, somewhere in that neighborhood, right? He wasn't there for very long. Now, he goes on to say in all this time, he hadn't heard anything from Maggie or Paul. When he gets back to the property and realizes nobody is up at the house, he gets a feeling something is wrong. So he drove down to the kennels to check up on them, and that's when he discovers the bodies. He says he pulled up and he could see it was really bad. And at this point in the interview, I can maybe link the full interviews, but he starts to get emotional. He's talking about how bad it was. He goes on to describe the condition in which he found the bodies, which is pretty gruesome. Once again, emphasizing that he did touch both of them. Now, he says that the first thing he did was run over to Paul and try to turn him over. He notes that Paul's cell phone popped out of his pocket and that he, quote, picked it up and tried to do something with it, but then quickly put it back down. He went over to Maggie and he says he checked for a pulse, even though he could pretty well see that she was gone. And at this point, he called 911.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah. I'm confused about the whole picked up the phone and tried to do something with it.
Yeah, that's kind of where my head was at initially too, because I'm like, what in that moment could have felt like time sensitive or critical about like doing anything with their phone? Like that wouldn't have been other than like foreseeably maybe calling 911. Like
Right, but obviously, like, you had your own phone.
exactly. And that's where my head went next. It's like, okay, well, I could see where like maybe if it fell out and you were like, oh, well, the phone right there, I'm going to call it. But at the same time, like, you already have a phone,
Yeah.
so just
Well,
don't touch anything. It's a crime scene, you know?
and you're a lawyer. You're a lawyer, so you know
Oh,
this.
that's true. So it's like an extra
Yeah.
layer and a
Well,
wrongful
and
death attorney at that, right?
yeah, and what's funny is later on in the investigation, and I honestly can't remember which interview this was. There were several of them, but you know, Alec talks about, the police are trying to unlock Paul's phone. And Alex starts racking his brain. They're like, do you have any idea what his passcode might be? Like, he knew Maggie's passcode, so they were able to get into her phone fine.
Right.
But he said that Paul kept his phone under lock and key. He said, I would be very surprised if anybody knew that passcode. So, you obviously didn't have it. Like, why did you pick the phone up?
Right. And I mean, I will say, and this is obviously, I don't really need to play devil's advocate here because I think we all know like where this is headed at
Yeah,
this point. But just for the sake of like being a relatively impartial party, seeing as I don't know a ton about this case other than what I've caught in headlines and what you're telling me,
sure.
like the other day I was broken down, which whatever, won't go into the details of that.
Broken down, is that what they call running out of gas nowadays?
And it was a really rough day. So anyway, I was broken down and I live in Florida, so my phone gives like the your phone's too hot warning, right?
Yeah,
And but it still gives an option for like, is this an emergency? And I can press yes, and like I could foreseeably dial 911. Now I was too ashamed of my situation to use that feature because I don't consider running out of gas to be like a 911 type of emergency. However, it was a feature that was available, and I think most phones do have like an emergency only feature where you
mm,
can utilize that. However, I think we can all agree that he probably had his own phone, and that's not necessarily where I think the average person's brain would go in that type of a scenario. But that said, I realize that when you're in the midst of a trauma, you might not be reacting as rationally as usual. Anyway, that's
sure.
just a little aside that like I could maybe, if I was on a jury, give like a little bit of benefit of the doubt for that. If they used that as a defense, I'd be like, okay, like I could see,
Yeah.
or like his phone was in the car. You know what I mean?
And
Anyway.
and that's the thing. There's a lot. This case is messy. And I'm interested to hear your thoughts at the end because it's a hard case. It's not,
Right.
this family objectively sucks. There's no doubt about that. Just as generally as human people, they suck. But as far as this murder, it's not cut and dry, and that's tough. So now, after he got off the phone with 911, sorry, we're at the point where he's detailing what happened to the investigators.
Okay.
So he goes on to say that after he got off the phone with 911, he called his two brothers, John and Andy, and that he also tried to call a close friend that lives nearby, but he couldn't reach him.
Right.
Now, he goes on to say that he had a great relationship with his wife and son, and that, of course, he and Maggie, they had problems here and there, like all married couples do.
Mm-hmm.
But overall, they were just as happy as they could be. And he also continues to bring up the boat crash over and over as a possible motive for these murders.
Right.
Now, the investigators ask if Alec had any issues with trespassers or break ins on the property. Once again, he brings up the boat crash and the alleged threats that Paul has received as a result. He goes on to say that Paul has even been attacked in public. He's been hit and punched and so on and so forth, and he's received threats online. And after this is kind of weird. Alec goes off on this kind of random tangent and he brings up the groundskeeper for the property, a man named CB Rowe. And he goes on to tell investigators that this man allegedly had recently told Alec a story about how he was recruited by the FBI to kill radical members of the Black Panther Party.
Okay.
Yeah, it's really weird. It gives the idea that he's really trying to push the suspicion away from himself.
Right.
Because it's like, how does that doesn't equate to, I don't know, randomly murdering your wife's son. That's just,
Right.
I mean, it's just obviously a shitty thing to be involved in, but like, I don't know, very bizarre.
Yeah. It's like we hear people say all the time in other like completely different cases, like people are convicted of murder because they were found with drugs in their system, for example. And it's like, okay, well,
Yeah.
being on illicit substances doesn't necessarily make a murderer. Like,
It's funny you should say that because that's going to come up in this case
oh my
too.
gosh. Okay, well,
Oh, for
when in
sure.
Rome.
When in Rome.
Aw.
So, 3 days later, Alex was once again corralled back into a sled vehicle and questioned. on the night's events. So this time he was a little less emotional and he was able to provide more detail. Now, during this interview, Alec details the days leading up to the murder as well as the day of. Now, he names off Paul's closest friends and, just people that might, the investigators might want to talk to, that might be able to give them anything. And they ask about Maggie and Alec's biggest arguments and Paul's greatest behavioral issues.
Mm-hmm.
The investigators ask him to start with the morning of June 7th, and Alec is having a difficult time remembering the exact details of his day at this point. However, he does proceed to say that he got up in the morning and went to work, but he came home a little early because he and Paul had plans to get ready to plant sunflowers the next day.
Okay.
He once again details that the family had dinner together, and he says that Maggie walked down to the dog kennels, and this time he says he's not exactly sure where Paul went, but just that Paul also left the house around this time.
Right.
Now, he sticks to the same story as the previous interview, that he stayed back at the house, took a nap, called Maggie, etc. Now, he also adds that in between the time when he woke up from his nap and that he left the property, he remembers hearing a car pull up to the property and that he was certain it was Maggie or Paul. He says in the interview, quote, "I was certain they had pulled up, but they didn't." And this agent asks, "Well, if you thought somebody pulled up, what did it sound like?" To which Alec replies, quote, "I can't tell you what it sounded like. I just know that I thought my wife had pulled up or that Paul had pulled up. I can't tell you what it sounded like."
Yeah, I mean, because I don't know. Like, I will say, like, I'm not a super observant person. I mean, obviously, I didn't realize my gas gauge was at nothing.
This is a
So,
fact.
like,
Well, thank you so much,
I
but
love you. It's not a quality about myself that I'm proud of. However, I'm just saying I'm not super observant. But even so, I feel like if I remembered enough to remember like hearing a sound like a car pulling up, then I could have at least probably given a description of like, well, it didn't sound like a lawnmower or whatever. It sounded like a smaller vehicle pulling in.
yeah.
You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah,
that
like it
makes
didn't
sense.
sound like a fucking horse and carriage.
Yeah, like, I mean, it sounded like a standard car or it sounded like a bigger truck. You know what I mean? I feel like you can at
Sure.
least give investigators something if you remember enough to remember you heard the sound of a vehicle pulling up.
Yeah. So he goes on to say that he left the house very shortly after the ghost vehicle pulls up. No pun intended on the ghost vehicle.
I was wondering. Yikes.
So, and then he goes on to say that on the way to his mother's home that night, he spoke on the phone with his brother John, his friend and fellow attorney Chris Wilson, and also his son Buster.
Okay.
Now, Buster was out of town away somewhere at this point. And the investigator asks if any guns were stored at the dog kennels. Jesus, at the gun kennels. At the dog. I mean, might as well have been a fucking gun kennel, right? So, at the dog kennels, remarks that the guns weren't supposed to be stored out at the kennel, but it wouldn't be unusual to find one out there. And he says that the entire family, but especially Paul, had a bad habit of leaving guns where they didn't belong.
Just like Paul left boats about? Like, what is going
No,
on?
exactly.
Are you good, bro?
That was part of this whole interview. Apparently, he left guns and boats and clothes all over the place.
Okay, Paul.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, apparently that was a habit they had. So now Alec did go on to say that he knows one of the specific guns used in the shooting, which was a AR style 300 blackout rifle. Although the family owned at least one of them, it was definitely not out of the kennel that night.
Okay.
Now, the gun in question, we're going to go briefly into this gun here. It was the one that killed Maggie. So they were, I don't know if I mentioned this previously, they were killed with two different guns.
Okay.
Paul was killed with a 12-gauge shotgun, and Maggie was killed with an AR-style rifle using 300 blackout ammunition.
Okay, and at this time, do law enforcement officers have a particular belief or stance, like at this point in the investigation, as to if it was, just two separate weapons or potentially two separate perpetrators.
They're not saying a lot at this point. This is only 3 days after the murder,
Okay,
so I don't think they have a particular stance at this point. If they did, they didn't make it known.
that's valid.
Now, the approach that they kind of took in this whole investigation, mind you, is that they're starting from the inside and working their way out. So they're like,
Okay.
we're going to start with the closest person. So Alec was kind of a person of interest the whole time that they were just trying to
Mhm.
eliminate.
Right.
So in these interviews, are they going to play? I don't think they're going to lay all their cards out on the table for Alec to know what they're saying.
Sure.
Now, just back to this rifle quick. So this is the gun that killed Maggie. Again, an AR style rifle with 300 blackout ammunition. Now, Alec had purchased 2 of these guns as Christmas gifts for both of his sons in 2016. Paul's rifle was said to have been lost or stolen, and a replacement was purchased in 2018. Although there's some confusion over whether the replacement was actually purchased because these people had so many goddamn guns they couldn't even keep track.
Right.
One source that I found said that yes, absolutely, the replacement was purchased on this day and in this year. And then some sources say, well, we don't really know if a replacement was ever purchased. Now, bottom line is the stolen gun and the alleged replacement have to this day never been accounted for.
Okay.
And so on August 11th, 2021, SLED brings Alex in for a third interview. This interview took place in an interview room, like civilized people, not in a fucking truck. And also present was Alex's friend and fellow attorney, Corey Fleming. Do we remember Corey Fleming from the Gloria Satterfield case? Yes, they are pals. They are just the best of friends. Now, it should be... Actually, no, we're not going to go there just yet. Now, Corey isn't officially there representing Alec, but the interview starts with him immediately jumping on the defense, claiming that they were under the impression that they were there for an update on the case, not to be questioned.
Okay.
The SLED investigator assures both men that he does have information to give them, but he has some questions first. Fleming doesn't like that answer, and he's just like, well, why can't we have the information first? To which the investigator replies basically like, listen, pal, just let me ask you these questions first. And they go back and forth for a little while, and then they actually get into the questions. Before they actually get into the questions, Fleming asked the investigator, are you asking him these questions to further your investigation, or are you asking them because you think he's a suspect?
Right.
And the investigator replies, I'm asking them to further my investigation. So Corey reiterates basically, so he's not a suspect. To which the investigator just goes, look, he just shrugs his shoulders. And he goes on to explain that at this point, he can't rule Alec out. He's trying to rule Alec out, but he can't.
Right.
And they proceed with the line of questioning. Now, a lot of stuff that comes up in this interview is stuff we've already gone over at this point, and I'm not going to be a broken record here. However, there's just a few new little details that come up during this interview.
Okay.
The first detail is that we learn that a video from the day of the murders has been discovered on Paul's phone that shows Alec and he's just messing around with this limp tree somewhere on the family's property.
Okay.
I know that sounds crazy.
Like why?
I don't know. I guess it checks out. He said they were like riding around the property, like planning to plant shit and like do work. And so I guess he was just fucking with this tree. I don't know. Now, the significance of the video is not the stupid tree, but it's the fact that Alec was wearing different clothes than what he had on when authorities arrived at the scene. Now, it was also later revealed that those were not the clothes that he wore to work that day. So he's changed clothes several times, and that's nowhere in his synopsis of the day.
Right. But, and again, just kind of thinking out loud here. When you just have all this money like that, is that just like what rich people do? I feel like
I
that's what
mean,
rich people
I
do, but I
don't
don't know.
know
I'm like, I've never been rich.
because
Rich people, weigh in. Is that what you do?
I've
I have
definitely met
questions.
I have definitely met rich people that smell like they don't fucking change their clothes or wash their asses. So
Sorry, rich people. Not at you
not
personally, but
no, I'm not saying like oh like not that I've met a vast population of rich people. I'm just saying off the top of my head, I
I
know
haven't
some
met a
rich.
lot.
I know
That-
like one or two rich people that have absolutely abysmal hygiene standards.
yeah.
Um, so when asked at what point he changed his clothes, Alec couldn't recall. He had no idea. So he had changed his clothes a few times during the day, but he didn't know when that happened.
I don't love that.
Yeah, I mean, like, I just feel like, I mean, not that it's a significant days event, but I feel like it's a question you should be able to answer.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the thing for
Like,
me. Like, if he
oh,
had been like,
I changed when I got home from work. Okay, that's a normal thing that normal people do.
sure, or even just to be like we were just talking about, say, oh, I didn't even think to mention it, but I usually change my clothes a few times a day, just depending on what I'm doing. And I did change my
Yeah.
clothes like for X and Y, that's just a normal
Like,
part of my routine. Okay,
just be
fine.
like, okay, my ass crack was sweaty. So, like, okay, great. You
Like, I
changed your
respect
drawers.
that. Thanks for cleaning your ass.
Absolutely.
Like, valid answer, my guy, but he couldn't do that, and that's where the problem
No, he
lies.
he could not detail that information. So, in this interview, a point that I also found interesting was that he claimed that he was at his mom's house at night for 45 minutes to an hour, which doesn't
Right.
add up with the time frame that we were given in the first interview.
And I just need to say that I find it equal parts interesting and appalling that, like, his primary alibi is a little old lady with dementia. Like, I see you. I see what you're doing.
Yeah, yeah,
You nasty little
exactly.
shit.
Yeah, I mean that's a shitty alibi. So no, it would be determined that Maggie and Paul were killed between 9 and 9:30 that evening.
Right.
So that's the time frame that he was supposedly at his conveniently at his dementia having mom's.
Right.
Um, let's see. Now, just 10 days after the murders, Alec's brothers went on ABC News to beg and plead that anyone with information in this case please come forward. And on June 25th, 2021, Alec himself posted a $100,000 reward for any information that could lead to an arrest. Now, what's interesting, however, is that this reward had a deadline of September 30th, 2021.
Oh,
Why?
that's weird. I've literally
Yeah.
never heard of that before.
Yeah, I don't know what the fuck was up with that. But during the time between June and September, Alec never made any public appearances or pleas asking the public to come forward with any information.
Right.
Also, 2 months after the murder, solicitor Duffy Stone, which again, the solicitor's office, his family is heavily connected to. His
Sure.
family is no longer at this point serving as solicitor, but they're still connected. So, solicitor Duffy Stone would have been the prosecutor. He would have been the prosecutor in this case. He
Right.
recused himself from the case, citing developments in SLED's investigation.
Mm.
Now, at they, like I said, his family held the position in that office until 2006, and Alec at that time was still volunteering in the office. So when he questioned as to the reasons for recusing himself, he only gave very vague details and said, it would be unethical for me to say anything. So we don't know officially why he recused himself, but we can make some assumptions here, I'm sure.
Right.
Now, let's go to September 4th, 2021. Alec Murdaugh is shot in the head.
Oh.
Yeah. The gunshot wound, which was obviously not fatal, was said to have just grazed his head. In a 911 call, Alec can be heard claiming that he was driving when he got a flat tire. He got out of his vehicle to change aforementioned tire, and someone stopped to help him. When he
Mm-hmm.
turned his back, the individual shot him. Now, When local authorities caught wind of the shooting, they began to follow the theory that the Murdaugh family was indeed being targeted. However, it was not very long that this theory lasted. And one of the factors that contributed to the unraveling of this theory were the inconsistencies in the stories being released by Alec's PR team. Yes, he has a PR team.
Of course he does.
Of course he does. They claim that Alec had temporarily lost his vision due to this gunshot and that he was in the ICU because his life was in danger. However, he was released only 2 days later. Now, soon after that, he releases a statement that he will be resigning from his law firm and that he has been battling addiction for 20 years. And that he would be entering rehab. Now, the truth is that the law firm actually asked for him to resign. And this took place on September 3rd, just one day before Alec was shot. And this was following the discovery of a check in Alec's desk, which led the company to dig a little deeper and find that he had been misusing company funds and stealing from clients.
Oh, there it is.
There it is.
God.
Following Alec's statement, his firm did actually put out their own statement, effectively saying, hey, we were made aware of the situation. Or, I'm sorry, hey, we got rid of him because he was stealing.
Right.
At this time, SLED and South Carolina Bar Association were made aware of the situation, and Alec's license practice law was suspending pending investigation.
That's
Now,
what
10 days. Yeah. Now, 10 days after Alec was shot, police did make an arrest in that matter. In fact, it was Alec himself who led police to his shooter. On September 14th, 2021, Alec confessed that the shooting was in fact a suicide attempt, arranged in hopes that his surviving son Buster would receive a $10 million life insurance payout. Now, the shooter was 61-year-old Curtis Edward Smith, a former client of Alec's. And Alec claimed that Curtis contributed to his addiction and that he had been selling Alec drugs. And essentially, he jumped on the opportunity to help Alec off himself. Now, Curtis, however, told police a different story. Curtis alleged that Alec had set him up, and he alleged that Alec asked him to meet up, and that it wasn't until he arrived at the agreed upon location that Alec asked him to help him commit suicide.
God, I knew the second that you gave like his account of what happened, I'm like, okay, well, that's not what happened. So let's hear what actually happened.
So there's a lot of confusion on that. So, because to be fair, it's been stated as fact, and I don't know how they found this out, but I have seen it stated as a fact from several sources that Alec did pay him $100,000.
God, but was it before or after the event?
And that's the part that I couldn't figure out.
I just kind of felt like, and I mean, again, you know, this is purely speculation. Like, I have no fact basis for this, other than just like my opinion of who this guy seems to be as a person. But when you were recounting what he said happened, I was thinking, like, I feel like it's more likely that this was some type of like a blackmail situation, you know?
Yeah, but I have no idea.
Yeah. Again, I just purely like chasing my feelings on that one, but you know,
absolutely,
whatever.
And we welcome all your feelings.
Thanks, friend.
Actually, that's a lie. We don't do feelings here.
I was about to say, since when? I was like, that's the most supportive load of bullshit you've ever fed to me, but thanks for reading that.
If LJ's sad about something, she'll call me and she'll be like, tell I'm having a feeling. I'm like, wow, you couldn't have called any of your other friends about this.
Like, God, yeah, we don't do feelings.
We don't do feelings. So, now Curtis goes on to state that he did refuse this request, but that then Alec then made a move as if he was going to shoot himself, and Curtis attempted to get the gun from Alec, and it was during this struggle that the gun went off. Now, Curtis also told police that he was positive that the bullet didn't hit anybody. And allegedly, he just got into his vehicle and drove off after this. Now, there was a couple who was driving by and said to have witnessed some of what was going on, and they did call 911 to report a man bleeding on the side of the road, but said that they didn't stop because they thought it seemed like a setup. And on September 16th, 2021, Alec ended up turning himself in on charges related to a suicide attempt and attempt to commit insurance fraud by, unaliving himself. And his lawyers, of course, used his addiction as their primary defense, and he was released on a $20,000 bond and sent to rehab. But that is not all the scandal that September of 2021 had to offer for Mr. Murdaugh.
Of course
On
not.
September 15th, 2021, Alec was sued by the sons of Gloria Satterfield. Now, if you'll remember earlier, we talked about the unfortunate death of Miss Satterfield in the Murdaugh's house, who, quote, tripped and fell at their family hunting property.
Right. Didn't he tell them to sue them?
Oh, well, he sure did, and you're going to find out why.
Okay.
Because in true Murdaugh fashion, he had an ulterior motive.
I mean, I certainly assumed as much to begin with. I would just...
Yeah.
I'm intrigued to get to the bottom of that rabbit hole.
Yeah, that's where we're going. That's the hole we're diving into next.
Perfect.
So, now, it's important to note that Gloria worked for the Murdaughs for over 20 years. And she and her family were very close with them. They spent holidays together. And she was also their nanny, and she played a huge role in raising Buster and Paul.
Sure.
And, again, like we said, so he instructed her sons to sue him and said that if they did so, his insurance would pay them a settlement. And he connected them to attorney Corey Fleming, who also happened to be Alec's old law school roommate.
Mm-hmm.
So, as their attorney, Corey convinced the young men that there were financial matters that would be better handled by a banker. And at this point, enter Chad Westendorf, the banker that Corey had entrusted to allegedly help the Satterfield family. Corey convinces the young men to appoint Chad as their personal representative, and enabling him to make any and all legal decisions on their behalf in court.
Oh, spooky.
So, yeah, you can see where this is going. So Corey and Chad worked quickly and began negotiating to receive settlements. Only the Satterfield boys were never actually made aware of these settlements. And only one day after being appointed as their representative, the pair actually filed a petition in court asking the judge for access to a partial settlement in the amount of $505,000, while still being able to pursue additional insurance settlements in the same matter.
Mm-hmm.
So this petition was granted, but the sons never saw any of this money. The check arrived made out to Chad Westendorf as personal representative of the estate of Gloria Satterfield. Of the $505,000, Chad immediately stuffed $403,500 into a bank account called Forge. Now, later in March 2019, a second settlement with an insurance company was reached in the amount of $3.8 million. And once again, Gloria's family never saw a cent or was even made aware of the settlement. Now, keep in mind, also, they were initially promised a settlement of $100,000. And not only have they, these assholes could have even just given them each the $100,000 and pocketed the rest, and they would have never fucking been discovered. Like, you want to talk about stupid criminals? Like, you made over $4 million. You promised them $100,000 each. You could have cut them a check for $100,000. Probably, been fine. But I digress. Not that makes it right, but I'm just saying, like, you're fucking stupid.
Yeah.
Now, let's talk about the Forge account. Now, Forge was an account set up by none other than Mr. Murdaugh himself. And it was set up in 2015 with the Bank of America as Richard Alexander Murdaugh DBA Forge. DBA, for those that don't know, stands for doing business as. And it was intentionally designed to impersonate a little a legitimate business called Forge Consulting. And this business paid out victims who had won court settlements, actually. And the idea was to make it look as though the settlement checks he was receiving were going to a legitimate settlement consultant, when in actuality they were going into his personal account.
What a little shit.
Yeah. So in October of 2020, Corey and Alec filed to dismiss the lawsuit, stating that all parties had reached an agreement. And Judge Carmen Mullen signed off on this and said she believed that the men had received their funds and all was well. Now, it should also be noted here that when the $3.8 million settlement was reached, this very same judge was asked by Corey not to file the paperwork associated with the settlement with the county clerk, which would mean there would be no public record. Now, he claimed that this request was due to the boating accident that at the time had just occurred, and that he didn't want to bring attention to, I guess, the Murdaugh family's financial resources.
Right.
Now, meanwhile, the Satterfield boys knew nothing about the settlement or about the case being dismissed, and obviously we know now that that's the real reason why he requested that the paperwork not be filed with the county clerk.
Right.
And it wasn't until Alec began to come under scrutiny for stealing and misusing funds that they realized the settlement had even been reached in their mother's wrongful death case.
Right.
So the Satterfield family did obtain a new counsel, and they filed a new lawsuit, and thankfully a settlement was reached. And in that case, and Gloria's sons were ordered to receive all $4.3 million.
Good.
And it was also announced that SLED would be launching an investigation into Gloria's fall. And again, like I said, her body was set to be exhumed. I don't believe that's happened yet. But the investigation into her death is ongoing. And so we appreciate that.
Absolutely. That's interesting, though. I'd heard in the headlines that, that he had, like, definitively killed her, which, I mean, it's pretty safe to say that, I feel like, based on the information provided. But point being, I didn't realize that it was still ongoing.
Yeah, and I should say, Judge, I think she's facing some heat as well. To what extent, I'm not 100% certain, but this runs deep. This runs really, really deep. I'm not sure if she's faced any formal discipline, but there's definitely some talk about, potentially her involvement in all this.
Right.
So on October 6th, 2021, Alec's former law firm sued him for the funds he had stolen from their clients over the years. Because the Satterfield family was not the only people that Alec ripped off.
Sure.
There was a lot. Now, on October 14th, he was arrested and charged again. So he was arrested on October the 6th, but he was released. I'm sorry. No, they sued him on October the 6th. My apologies. He was arrested. The first time he was arrested was after the whole shooting situation, and then he was released on bond and sent to rehab. Now, on October 14th, as he was leaving the rehab facility in Florida, he was arrested again and charged in relation to the Gloria Satterfield case. He has remained in jail since then. Now, fast forward a good bit here. On July 12th, 2022, Alec Murdaugh is formally disbarred. And at this point, he is facing a grand total of 84 criminal charges and 11 lawsuits.
Holy guacamole. That is a lot of charges.
That is a lot of charges. And the juicy ones didn't come until 2 days later on July 14th. Over a year after the death of his wife and son, Murdaugh was charged with 2 counts of murder. He was charged with 2 counts of murder and 2 counts of using a weapon during the commission of a violent crime.
Okay.
Now, let's get into... Okay, so of course, he was charged. He's already in jail at this point, so it's just a new charge. And about a week or so after the charge, of course, he pled not guilty at his bond hearing. And eventually, the trial was set for January 30th, 2023. Now, I'm going to do a brief dive into the trial. We're not going to go too deep because, number one, we've all seen it. Number two, trials are fucking boring. We already covered the juicy shit. If you want to go into the trial, be my guest, but that's not what we're doing here.
Yeah, and from my understanding, like a lot of the information that we're discussing, like it's a part of the case, like that's a lot of the same information that would be presented in the trial. So it's a matter of just like not being redundant, really.
Yeah, absolutely. So now a couple things that came up with in the trial, and we're going to talk about here we have to prove that motive means an opportunity, right? So what the prosecution would argue was the motive is, again, all going back to this damn boat accident. So lawyer that the Beach family had hired,
Right.
in the wrongful death case against Alec, Mark Tinsley. So Alec had told Mark Tinsley that he was broke. Like, hey, listen, I can maybe give you $1 million, but I'm broke. By his it sounds ridiculous. So I'm pretty sure, if I remember correctly, I think they were seeking $10 million, and he was kind of like, look, I'm a little strapped for cash. I can maybe give you $1 million.
God.
Now, Mark filed a motion to compel, which meant that Alec would have to produce his financial records and prove that he was broke. And this hearing was set to occur on June 10th, 2021, which would have been just a few days following the murders.
Right.
Now, at this point, Alec had not yet been revealed as a thief and a fraud. And if this hearing would have happened, he absolutely would have been found out, of course.
Sure.
So the prosecution alleged that Alec killed his wife and son to distract from his finances and gain sympathy. Additionally, on the same day of the murders, the CFO at the family law firm confronted him, after learning, pardon me, that $792,000 in legal fees were missing, and she believed that Alec had taken it. I don't know if she explicitly said that at the time, but I think he knew he had taken it, and so these fees were supposed to be paid to the firm from attorney Chris Wilson's firm. Now, keep in mind here that Chris is another close friend of Alec's. They go all the way back, like, to high school.
Right.
Now, this conversation was cut short when Alec received a text regarding the condition of his sick father. As it would turn out, Alec kind of spun the context of the text to fit his agenda, and it turns out that his father's condition was actually improving. And this all took place just hours before the murders of his wife and son, and just days before he was set to reveal his finances in a scheduled court hearing.
Right.
So the prosecution argued that Alec shot Paul and Maggie with 2 different guns to avoid being caught, and then proceeded to manufacture an alibi to lead investigators away from him. Now, the tricky part of this trial is that there is no direct evidence tying Alec to these murders. Everything is completely circumstantial. Which, checks out. He's a lawyer. The guy's not stupid. As much as he acts stupid, he's not. Now, additionally, the state would not know until the pretrial motion started whether or not Alec's financial crimes would be admissible in court for this murder case.
Right.
Now, of course, Alec and all his, rich old white dude glory had a solid defense team of experienced lawyers. And they based their defense on a botched investigation by SLED, a lack of murder weapons, and a solid alibi.
Girl said, "In some salad."
And some salad. God. A solid alibi. That's what they call a salad.
That is what they call a salad. God,
God,
are we okay?
I could go for a salad right about now. A good big fat Orlando salad.
God, come to mama.
For those that don't know, or the city of Orlando is just killing it. The restaurants are killing it in the salad
They
department.
really are. I don't know what's going
Honestly,
on.
I don't know what's going on down there, but there's just every restaurant has like some variation of big, beautiful, juicy salad.
Fly to me. Come get your green.
Honestly, so but I can't believe that's what they call a solid alibi. But anyways, and additionally, they also based their defense on a direct testimony to Alec's character,
Right.
which, they attempted to paint him as a loving father and husband who was incapable of murder. Now, we talked about this earlier, this is where this comes into play. So, part of their whole strategy was to admit that he was a liar and a thief and a drug addict, but that despite that, he wasn't capable of murder.
Got it. That's full circle.
Full circle moment. So the trial lasted for 6 weeks, and there were 75 total witnesses called.
Mm-hmm.
I think there was something like over 200 potential witnesses, but ultimately 75 witnesses were called.
Wow.
Now, in total, 5 jurors were removed over the 6 weeks of the trial, leaving only one alternate when all was said and done.
How many?
5 jurors were removed over the 6 weeks of the trial.
Pretty significant.
Yeah, for sure. Now, I'm going to just go over some facts that we discovered during the trial that, is not stuff we already know from the investigation, because we don't want to be broken records here. We learned, surprise, surprise, Alec lied about his alibi.
Oh, sucker.
He had previously told police and others that he hadn't been to the family's outdoor dog kennels on the night of June 7th, 2021. In the hours leading up to the murder, but a video on Paul's phone recorded his voice near the kennels minutes before the deaths.
Oh, wow.
When he was called up to the witness stand, Murdaugh did acknowledge that was his voice, but he continued to maintain that he had been fully cooperative with the police investigation, other than lying about that one small detail.
Right. Which is like, why lie at all?
Well, yeah. I mean, you're just so forthcoming, Alec.
Guilty.
Of course, he primarily blamed his erratic behavior before and after the murders on his opioid addiction, and he claimed his consumption of as much as 2,000 milligrams of oxycodone a day in the preceding months had left him with paranoid thoughts, and that he also distrusted the police and did not want them to consider him a suspect. Right. So, now, on the flip side, he also denied manufacturing an alibi. And this is where it gets confusing, because he says, oh, well, I did lie, but I didn't manufacture the alibi.
I was about to say, but isn't you just acknowledge that you lied, so therefore...
This is where you're like, okay, all the evidence is circumstantial. There's nothing directly tying him, but this man is fucking lying left and right.
Right.
I mean, what are we supposed to think?
Honorable right now.
No, not at all. I mean, despite the fact that he's a shit human being, like overall, just like from the jump, he's also just like lying and lying and lying and lying. So, of course, prosecutors did allege that he tried to create an alibi for himself by making numerous phone calls and a high-speed trip to his ailing mother's house immediately after the murders were later deemed to have taken place. Yeah. So, I mean, which could add up, because they said that, Maggie and Paul were killed between 9 and 9:30. That supposed phone call went out at 9:04.
Right.
So he could have very easily shot them at 9 o'clock, quick made a call. It checks out. So now, of course, he denied those allegations and maintained that he did not discover his wife and son had been murdered until he returned from his mother's house to check on them at the kennels.
Right.
And prosecutors were like, bro, your story doesn't add up.
No, it really
You,
doesn't. He's
you
just
were there at the
present leading
kennels
into the
minutes
shop.
before they died, but not present when they were killed. Not able to hear the gunshots. Like, it didn't make any sense.
Right.
Now, an expert forensic engineer did testify that it was possible that someone in the house at the Murdaugh estate may not have been able to hear the gunshots at the kennels. This is a 1,700-acre property, I believe, so it's quite large.
Oh, expansive. That's
Yeah.
massive.
So, and Murdaugh has claimed that he was in the house at the time of the murders and never heard the multiple gunshots.
Right.
Now, neither of the murder weapons believed to have been used in the killings, again, have been recovered by police. But they do believe that they were likely the family's guns. And a forensic expert did testify for the prosecution that the spent casings found around the murder scene matched older spent casings found at the estate.
Okay.
Again, this is a hunting property, so I'm sure there were spent casings all over the place.
Sure.
Finally, at 6:41 p.m. on March the 2nd, 2023, the jury reached a verdict of guilty on all counts after less than 3 hours of deliberation.
Wow. I love that they just all like got in a room and were basically like, are you guys good? Just like sending him to jail for life. And they're like, yeah.
Bet.
Sure.
You wanna grab a snack after this?
Yeah. They're like, actually, we could have a snack now so it doesn't seem like we deliberated too quickly.
Absolutely.
God.
That would be the thing. That would be what I would be doing. I'd be like, do you guys want to order a pizza?
Yeah. We've got to make this look like we had a real good chat.
Yeah. Get some DoorDash real quick. So Judge Clifton Newman, who knew Murdaugh for years before this trial, addressed the court on the Friday morning, saying that he did not expect a confession from Murdaugh, but
Right.
he stated that the state did not seek the death penalty in this case, but noted that, quote, your family has prosecuted many people in this very courtroom, seeking capital punishment in many cases for lesser offenses.
Right.
And Murdaugh, maintained his innocence throughout the entire ordeal. And Judge Newman said, quote, it may not have been you. It might have been the monster you become when you take 30, 40, 50, or 60 opioid pills.
Right.
And he proceeded to sentence Alec Murdaugh to 2 consecutive life sentences in prison, the maximum in the case.
Well, I mean, bare minimum, that's what he deserved. It's not the death penalty.
Bare minimum, that's what he deserves. So going forward, there's a lot to work out. Like I said, their estate is basically being liquidated, and there's a lot of people, a lot of lawyers working to determine where this money needs to go, where they had a lot of victims and they screwed over a lot of people. And the Beach family, the Satterfield family, and many, many others definitely deserve a piece of the pie here. So
Absolutely. The money does not need to be going back into the hands of the family members who they were trying to make sure got a nice cut of things before all of this came to light. The victims deserve compensation here.
Absolutely. This family has enough money. They'll be fine.
Yeah, they're down to like their last couple million, but other than that,
yeah, they'll be all right. Cover.
I'm not worried about them.
No, definitely not. So that is the story of the fall of the Murdaugh dynasty, ladies and gentlemen.
Well, thank you so much for deep diving into that, Toe. I know that was a big meaty case.
It was a big old meaty boy.
God, you're such a team player. Well,
I can't
know
stand myself.
Been going on for like a while now. This has been a pretty hefty episode. So do we just want to jump into the socials here, wrap things up?
Oh yeah, socials are a thing that we have. You can find us on the Book of Faces at that name.
Say
that
Psycho right now. Yeah, Say Psycho right now, a true crime and paranormal podcast. And we have an associated Facebook group. It's Stay Psycho Right Now, a true crime and paranormal podcast community.
We sure do.
Yes. We also have all the essentials at Say Psycho Right Now, including Instagram, TikTok, which by the time you're listening to this, we will be more active on TikTok.
Yeah.
That will happen soon.
She said all the essentials. God, what a
All
time
the
to be alive. Fucking
essentials.
2023.
God. And of course, Patreon as well.
Yes.
Patreon, our tiers start at $3 a month. If you go with the middle or highest tier, which are $10 and $15 respectively, after 3 consecutive months of pledging, you do get a little tchotchke gift in the mail from us.
Tchotchke gift?
Yeah, a little tchotchke gift, just like a little tchotchke. You've never heard that before?
No.
Oh my gosh, it's just like a little something something.
I thought tchotchke was like a person.
No, there will be no human trafficking for second and third tier members. Sorry, guys. It's like a sticker. Like a nice quality vinyl sticker. Spoiler.
It's a sticker.
Yeah, like just a little tchotchke. So yeah.
I just thought tchotchke was like, I don't know, a famous person that did something.
Nope. Tchotchke's a sticker coming in the mail after 3 months of pledges for our second and third tier members.
Agree.
Yeah, and people who pledge a sponsorship at any tier, including our $3 ones, you guys do get access to episodes early. We send those to you early every week. And
we try to. Sometimes Toe fails at that, honestly, but we do our best.
You've always done your part in getting them to people early. Sometimes it's not like, 4 days
as early as we like. We aim for Fridays. We aim for Fridays.
Yeah, and then sometimes it ends up being Saturday because keep in mind we both work full time as well. So far,
sure do.
Yeah, so far we have lost money doing this.
And we've loved every second of it.
Yeah, I mean we're loving it, so it's great. But
not as much money as we lost that one time at Target.
Oh my God, we are not talking about that. God help me. So yeah, if you guys sponsor us as patrons, that would also help us though, because I mean the more money we hopefully end up making off this in the long run, the sooner that we can get those things out. We always try to prioritize it because we appreciate the sponsorships that we do have. But the more patrons that we have, the easier that it will be to do things like this. And aside from that, our bonfire campaign has ended at this point. It was kind of a precursor to our Murdaugh murders. So there will be no more bonfire shirts. But by the time you're listening to this, you can access our store at saypsychorightnow.com. And I will say, Toe and I have kind of had different roles as business partners often do when getting a company off the ground.
Toe
has been our editing icon. She's been amazing with that, and I have to give so much credit to her because she has really been pulling some major weight in that department.
Oh my God, and so good at doing
you
things.
Really are. She just picks up these niche little really marketable skills. A lot of them.
Yeah, maybe we should do a full special edition episode for patrons on Toe's niche skills.
That would actually be hilarious. We should, because you have enough of them to make a little
get to know us episode about Toe's niche skills and LJ's irrational fears.
Oh my God, why do I get the irrational fears episode? Hate that's my identity.
I'm sure I could think of something else. It was just in the moment I was trying to think of something weird about you, and I was like, oh, she's afraid of the freezer.
She's also afraid of gas stations, hence breaking down on the side of the road.
Gas stations and freezers. And I was like, yep, that would be a great episode. That's quality content right there.
My brain can't handle the sound of the crunchy
I'm
ice.
just kidding. LJ has a lot of skills. She's a very talented person.
God, I did do the store, so like I'm proud
She
of
did.
that.
Yeah, she did the store, and also anything that's related to communication with human people is like, I would say at least 95% LJ, because I talk to people like a fucking uncivilized caveman.
I would be like, listen, bitches, this is what we need from you today.
LJ is gainfully employed in the, professional world, so she knows how to like act like a civilized human being.
For at least 45 seconds, and then I hang up the phone with people and I'm like, oh my god, that one was a bitch.
Absolutely.
So don't be shitty to service workers. How's that?
Don't be. I mean, I don't think that's the category of your job, but
No, it is. It's absolutely
is it?
like, yeah, because technically, like, my official title would be licensed agent or customer service representative. So,
See, I would call you like fancy office person.
thanks, babe. More people should call me that. I often get, are you the secretary? I'm like, no, bitch. No, that's not what I do here.
No, it's not what I do here at all.
And I'm supposed to be the less feral of the two of us.
I'm a real person. No hate secretaries. We do love you guys.
No, absolutely. It's just like if I put in the time and effort and the money into securing a certain license, and you assume that because I'm a woman answering the phone that I'm a secretary.
Just 100%. Listen, when I tell people that I want to go to flight school, they're like, "Oh, so you want to be a flight attendant?"
Ma'am, sir, no. No, that's not what I want.
No disrespect to the flight attendants out there. You guys are so fucking essential. Love you guys so much, and you are so underappreciated. I acknowledge that you do a lot more than, like serve drinks and stuff. They play a vital role in the safe operation of a flight. But that being said, it's the assumption. And that's not a thing you go to school for. Like, yes, you go to training after you're hired, but I don't know. I could go on for days about this, but point being,
same vibes for like doctors and nurses and male and female, quote unquote typical roles, and teachers and you know what I mean? Let's just like stop gendering careers. How's that?
Let's stop gendering a lot of things.
Fact. All right, and we'll leave you guys on that for today. Stop gendering stupid stuff.
Stop gendering stupid stuff. Don't be a fucking crooked little bitch. Don't let your kids drink underage and then give them a boat.
And don't lose all your boats all the time. What the fuck? If you're doing that, stop it.
Right. Stop losing your boats. Like, it's just not cool to be
out
a
of
boat
hand.
loser.
Don't be a boat loser.
Keep track of your boats. Keep track of your guns. Love you guys so much. We'll see you next week.
Bye, bitches.
Toodaloo.
Oh no, did we perform a fuckaroni?